She was standing in the rain in a dress she'd been saving for something important, and the cab that was supposed to take her there had just canceled. She didn't see me pull in. I sat in the truck for a second watching her, then I rolled down the window. "Get in," I said. She looked up. For a moment she just stood there in the rain with her phone and her dress and the particular expression of someone whose evening had just started falling apart. "Hi, my name is Nate Calloway. I'm 31 years old, and I live in a 4-unit apartment building on the north side of Asheville, North Carolina, a city that smells like coffee and wood smoke and takes its mountain weather personally. I'm a carpenter. Custom work mostly, kitchen cabinets, built-in shelving, the kind of furniture people buy once and keep for the rest of their lives. I've been doing it for 8 years and I'm good at it. My hands show it. My truck shows it too. Sawdust in every crevice, a tape measure that lives in the cup holder, and a passenger seat that had seen more lumber than people for most of the last 3 years. Until Jess Harmon moved into the apartment across the hall 5 months ago. She'd arrived on a Saturday with 2 carloads of books and one friend who left after an hour. I helped her carry the heavier boxes. She thanked me with a cup of coffee made in a French press she'd unpacked before anything else. We talked for 20 minutes on the hallway floor, surrounded by cardboard, and I learned she was an editor at a small independent publishing house downtown, that she'd lived in 4 cities in 6 years, and that she made the best coffee I'd ever had from a place that wasn't a cafe. After that, things found their shape the way things do between neighbors who are paying attention. She left soup outside my door when I worked through dinner. I fixed the bathroom cabinet hinge that had been pulling loose since she moved in. I fixed it without being asked, the second time I walked past and heard it catch wrong. She brought back a jar of local honey from the farmer's market the following Saturday and left it with a note that said, "For the coffee. Also, you fixed the hinge. Don't think I didn't notice." I kept the note. I told myself I wasn't sure why. We talked in the hallway more nights than not. Sometimes 10 minutes, sometimes an hour. She asked good questions, the kind that made you answer more honestly than you planned. I learned about the years she'd spent moving, always for someone else's reason, and how Asheville was supposed to be the first place she'd chosen entirely for herself. She learned about the work, about what it meant to put something together that was meant to last. It was comfortable, safe. Neither of us tried to make it more than that. Until the night I pulled into the parking lot and found her standing in the rain. She got in on the second try, the passenger door stuck in damp weather always had, and sat with her hands folded on her lap, and rain in her hair, and the expression of someone determined not to let the evening be a total loss before it even started. I handed her the old flannel I kept behind the seat. She draped it over her shoulders without asking what it was for. "His name is Daniel," she said, before I could ask. "We matched 3 weeks ago. He teaches literature at the university. His bio had a Chekhov quote." She paused. I thought that was a good sign. "Could still be," I said. She looked out the window at the rain on the glass. "I spent 40 minutes on this dress." I didn't say anything to that. I just drove. The roads were slick and the wipers needed replacing, and the radio got bad reception in the rain, so I left it off. Asheville at night in September, wet streets and mountain air and the particular quiet of a city that closes early. When I pulled up outside the restaurant, she didn't move right away. Warm light through the windows, people inside, the whole thing looking like a version of an evening she'd been hoping for. She looked at the door. "You don't have to go in," I said. "I know." She turned and looked at me directly. "But I spent 40 minutes on this dress." "You said that already." "It bears repeating." She got out. I watched her walk to the entrance, shoulders back, and then I sat there with the engine running for longer than I should have. The rain drummed on the roof. I drove home, changed out of my work clothes, made dinner I barely tasted, and sat on the couch with the TV on and the sound low, and my phone on the cushion beside me. It buzzed at 9:43. "Can you come get me?" I was already reaching for my keys. I found her half a block from the restaurant, standing under the awning of a closed bookshop, shoes in her hand, bare feet on the wet sidewalk. The dress was the same. She looked the same. But the particular brightness she'd had when she got in the truck an hour and a half earlier had gone somewhere quieter. She got in. The door latched on the first try this time. "You're getting better at that," I said. "I'm motivated by wanting to be inside a warm vehicle." I pulled away from the curb and didn't ask anything. She'd tell me when she was ready or she wouldn't. She told me after 2 blocks. "He was perfectly nice," she said. "Thoughtful, funny, asked real questions, remembered things I'd mentioned earlier and circled back to them. He was genuinely good at being on a date." She looked out at the wet street. "And I sat there the entire time thinking about the cabinet you're building for the Hendersons." I didn't speak. "Not because it's interesting," she said quickly. "I mean, it is interesting, the way you talked about the joinery last week, but that's not. I just kept thinking about the conversation we had on Tuesday when you explained why old-growth wood is different, and I thought, why isn't this the conversation I'm having right now?" We drove in silence for a minute. The rain had eased to a drizzle. The old heater came on, and the truck filled with the smell of warm dust, and whatever she'd put on before she left. Something light, barely there. She had her knees drawn up to her chest and her shoes on the floor, and she was staring at the middle distance the way people do when they're thinking out loud. "I'm tired of performing," she said. "I'm tired of sitting across from someone and trying to be the version of myself they might want to keep." She paused. "I think I've been doing it for so long I forgot what it feels like to just talk, like this." I kept both hands on the wheel. My jaw was tight in a way I hoped she couldn't see. When I pulled into the parking lot, she still didn't reach for the door. The rain had stopped. The lot was quiet and slick, the building lit up orange through her living room curtain. She was looking at her bare feet on the floor mat. Then she said it, very quietly, like she wasn't sure she meant to say it out loud. "Have you ever been somewhere you were supposed to want to be, and the whole time you just kept wishing you were here instead?" The truck idled. I didn't answer right away. I let the question sit the way it deserved to sit. After a moment, she opened the door. Cool air came in, rain smell and mountain night. She stepped out barefoot, shoes in her hand, and paused with one hand on the roof of the truck. She looked back at me. "Next time," she said. "Could it just be us?" She closed the door. Not hard, carefully, and walked up the stairs without looking back. I sat there for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. The engine idled, the lot was empty. The light in her window went on. I could have called after her. I could have said I'd been thinking about next time since the moment she got in the truck wearing that dress. I didn't. I drove the 40 feet to my parking spot and went inside and lay on top of the covers and stared at the ceiling and told myself she was just tired. She'd had a disappointing evening. She'd said something she'd probably want to take back in the morning. I told myself that until it almost sounded right. Almost. Sunday morning, her door opened at 8:47, and she knocked on mine with 2 coffees. She was in jeans and a blue sweater, and her hair was still damp. She looked like she'd slept fine. She handed me the coffee and said, "Farmer's market opens at 9. I'm going." She looked at me. "You're coming." I was putting on my shoes before she finished the sentence. The market was loud and alive and smelled like autumn, cider and fresh bread and the particular sweetness of late-season peaches. We wandered without a list, trying things, arguing over whether the local goat cheese was overpriced. It was, but we bought it anyway. She found a jar of sourwood honey and held it up to the light. "This is what good coffee deserves," she said. I thought about the note she'd left me 5 months ago, for the coffee. We ended up at a small breakfast counter at the far end of the market, the last 2 seats side by side. Our knees touched under the wooden plank. Neither of us moved. The coffee was strong and the eggs were perfect, and the noise of the market was exactly the right kind of background. After a while, Jess set her cup down and looked straight ahead at the row of tents. "I meant what I said last night," she said. "I'm not taking it back. I needed to say it again in daylight so you'd know it wasn't just the bad date talking." I turned on the stool so I could see her face. "Jess?" She looked at me. "I drove back across town at 9:43 on a Friday because you sent 4 words," I said. "I don't do that for just anyone." Something in her shoulders loosened, like she'd been holding a question since the night before and had just gotten the answer. "Okay," she said, very quietly. "Okay." I reached over and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't move back. Her skin was warm from the morning. We stayed like that for a moment, her eyes on mine, my hand barely at her face, while the market noise faded into something very far away. It wasn't a kiss, but it felt bigger than one. The week after the farmer's market was quiet in the way that means something. Not awkward quiet, fuller than that. Like we'd both heard the same thing and were still deciding what to do with it. She knocked on my door Tuesday evening with a question about a shelf she wanted mounted in her office. I came over, assessed the wall, found the studs, and had it up in 20 minutes. She handed me a glass of water, and we stood in her office looking at the shelf and talking about what she'd put on it. Books, obviously. A photograph from a trip to Portugal she'd taken alone the year before. A small ceramic bowl a friend had made. I noticed her apartment properly for the first time. Books everywhere, stacked on the floor beside the couch, double-shelved in the cases, piled on the kitchen counter beside the French press. A desk by the window with a manuscript on it, and pencils, and paper clips, and a mug that said I survived another meeting that could have been an email. Plants on the windowsill, a blanket thrown across the reading chair. It looked like somewhere that had been thought about, like someone who paid attention to the spaces they lived in. "The desk," I said, looking at it. She glanced over. "What about it?" "The left rear leg." She walked over and pressed down on the desk and felt the wobble. She looked at me. "How long have you known about that?" "Since the first time I was in here." She stared at me. "That was 3 months ago." "It wasn't dangerous," I said. "Just bothering me." She laughed, the real one. "You could have said something." "You didn't ask." She shook her head, but she was smiling. "Fix it," she said. "Please." I fixed it. 20 minutes. While I worked, she sat on the couch and read the first chapters of the manuscript she was editing, and occasionally read me a sentence that made her stop. I didn't mind. The apartment was warm and smelled like her coffee, and outside the mountain air was doing what it did in October, and the wobble in the desk leg was a simple problem with a simple solution, and I was exactly where I wanted to be. I noticed that too, later. 3 days later, I sent the text. "There's a place on Lexington that does wood-fired pizza on Thursdays. 7 o'clock. This time I'm not just the driver. Her reply came back in 40 seconds. "I'm bringing questions about joinery and a completely inappropriate amount of appetite. Consider yourself warned." I spent more time getting ready than I had in years. Scrubbed the sawdust from under my fingernails, put on the flannel shirt that didn't have any paint on it, cleaned out the passenger seat entirely, old receipts, a chisel I had no memory of leaving there, 3 pencils, and enough sawdust to fill a small bag. When I was done, it still looked like a work truck, but at least it looked like a work truck that was trying. She came down at 6:53 in a dark green dress and her hair loose, no heels, white sneakers. She stopped at the bottom step and looked at the truck. "You cleaned the passenger seat." I was going for the impression of being an organized person. "How's that going?" She opened the door and it latched on the first try. "Better than expected," she said. The pizza place was small and loud in the right way. Brick walls and mismatched chairs and a wood-fired oven throwing heat into the room. We got the corner table and ordered too much and talked for 3 hours. She told me about the novel she was editing, a debut author, the best first draft she'd read in 4 years. The kind of book that reminded her why she'd wanted this job. I told her about a piece I was making, a writing desk for a client who'd described exactly what she wanted, and trusted me to figure out how. "You like that part," Jess said, "when someone trusts you to figure it out." "I like building things that start as an idea," I said. "There's nothing there, and then there is." She looked at me for a moment. "That's what editing is," she said quietly. "Someone hands you something that's almost what it wants to be, and you help it get there." We walked after dinner, down toward the river path, the night air sharp and clean the way Asheville got in September, when the mountains finally let the heat go. She told me about the relationship she'd left 2 years ago. Not a bad man, not a dramatic ending. Just 2 people who had slowly stopped being honest with each other until the silence had more truth in it than anything they were saying. I stayed longer than I should have, she said, because leaving felt like admitting I'd made a wrong turn. I looked at her. Knowing when to stop building something that isn't working isn't a wrong turn, I said. It's just reading the wood right. She smiled, the real one, the one that started slow. You say everything in construction metaphors. It's a professional hazard. We stopped on the bridge over the creek. The city lights caught on the water below. She turned to face me, arms loosely crossed. The breeze lifted a few strands of her hair. Why are you still single? She asked. Real answer. I thought about it, really thought. I got good at keeping one foot near the door, I said. After a while, it becomes the only way you know how to stand. She was quiet for a moment. Then she stepped forward, close, and looked up at me. What if you just moved both feet in? I didn't plan it. I just looked at her standing there in the mountain night, her face upturned, her eyes steady on mine, and something in my chest that had been braced for a long time finally let go. I reached up slowly. She didn't step back. I kissed her the way you do something you've been careful about for too long. Unhurried, certain, like putting the last piece of a thing together and feeling it lock. Her hand came up and rested lightly over my heart. When we pulled apart, she kept her forehead against mine for a moment. I don't want fine, she whispered. Me neither, I said. I drove her home with the windows down, the night air filling the truck. At the bottom of the stairs, she turned instead of going up. I meant it, she said, about only wanting it to be you. I know, I said. She looked at me for a long moment, something quiet in her eyes. Not a question, more like a door she'd just decided to leave open. Do you have the courage to stay? Then she smiled, small and certain, and went up the stairs. I stood there at the bottom for a while after she was gone. The night was quiet. The mountain air smelled like wood smoke and rain coming. That question stayed with me. There was an afternoon in late October when the project I was working on, a set of custom kitchen cabinets for a house in Weaverville, hit a problem. The wood I'd been using had a defect I hadn't caught until I was 2/3 through, a hairline check running diagonally through the grain that would compromise the whole piece if I built over it. I'd have to start that section again. 2 days of work. I came home later than usual and sat on the step outside my door and didn't go inside. Jess's door opened about 10 minutes later. She stopped when she saw me, looked at my face, sat down on the step beside me without asking what was wrong. I told her about the wood. She listened. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then, is the piece ruined? No, I said. Just that section. I'll recut it. But you have to start over. Part of it. She nodded. She pulled her knees up to her chest and looked out at the parking lot. I had an author last year, she said. First novel, beautiful first draft. We worked on it for 4 months, and then in the 5th month he read it again and realized the entire second act was wrong. Not the writing, the structure, something fundamental. She paused. He wanted to scrap the whole thing. Did he? No, she said. We went back to where it was still right and rebuilt from there. It was another 6 months, but the book that came out the other side was the book it was always trying to be. I looked at her. She was still looking at the parking lot. The evening light was going gold on the side of the building. Go back to where it was still right, I said. And rebuild from there, she said. We sat on the step for another half hour. She told me about the book. It had been accepted by a publisher the month before. The author had sent her a copy of the acceptance letter. I told her about the wood, about the way old-growth timber worked differently, why it was worth the extra time to find the right piece. Neither of us was talking entirely about the things we were talking about. We both knew that. 11 days later, my site manager called me into the office trailer and put a folder on the table. A project in Savannah, a full historic renovation of a pre-Civil War estate. 8 months minimum. Lead carpenter, my own crew, the kind of work that usually went to people 10 years further along than me. Higher pay, travel stipend, the sort of opportunity that doesn't come twice. A month earlier, I would have taken it before he finished talking. I took the folder home and sat in the truck in the parking lot with the engine off and the lights in Jess's window on. I sat there for almost an hour. I thought about the way she'd looked at me on the bridge. About do you have the courage to stay? About how I'd spent 8 years getting very good at building temporary things and calling it a life. The next morning she knocked on my door with coffee, and one look at my face told her something was wrong. I told her about Savannah. She listened the way she always listened, completely, no interruptions, no rushing me toward any particular answer. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she asked the question I'd been dreading. What do you want? I gave her the easy answer first. It's a significant opportunity. She shook her head. I asked what you want, not what looks right on paper. I looked down at the coffee in my hands. I don't want to go, I said. But I'm scared that if I stay for you, one day you'll look at me and think you were the reason I didn't take something I should have. Jess set her cup down on the step between us. I don't want you to stay because you're afraid of losing me, she said. And I don't want you to go because you're afraid of needing me. I drove out to an old job site that evening, the house we'd finished the week before, framed and silent under the security light, bare studs and roof trusses catching the last of the evening sky. I sat on the tailgate with a cold bottle of water and looked at it for a long time. I'd always told myself I liked building things that lasted, but when it came to my own life, I'd only ever built temporary. I called it keeping my options open, easier that way, cleaner. If nothing had weight, nothing could fall on you. I thought about the wobbling desk leg I'd known about for 3 months and hadn't mentioned. I thought about the way I'd fixed it without being asked. I thought about what that meant about who I actually was, versus the story I'd been telling myself about keeping distance. Really, it was just fear wearing a tool belt. The next morning, I was in the trailer before the crew arrived. I'm turning it down, I told my site manager. He studied me. You sure? This kind of project doesn't come around often. I'm sure. Because of a girl? I smiled, small and honest. Partly. Mostly because I finally figured out that the best work isn't always the work that takes you farthest from home. He nodded once. First time you've sounded like you know what you're doing, he said. That afternoon I pulled into the parking lot and found Jess outside, trying to save a bag of groceries that had split at the bottom, apples and a bunch of herbs rolling across the wet asphalt. I parked and walked over and helped her collect them. She looked up at me with her arms full of apples and her hair in her face. Bouquet of optimism, I said. She laughed. Then she saw my face. I turned it down, I said. Jess went still. Nate, not because you asked me to, I said. Because I want to build something that isn't made of wood and nails for once. Because I'm tired of putting one foot near the door. She looked at me for a long moment, arms full of apples, hair across her face, standing in a parking lot in the late afternoon light. Then she stepped forward and put her arms around me, groceries and all. I felt her exhale against my shoulder, long and slow, like something she'd been holding since the day I told her about Savannah. I held her back, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the pull toward the exit. I just felt where I was, and it was enough. The night before I turned down Savannah, I drove out past the city limits and sat on the hood of the truck at a pull-off above the valley. The mountains were dark shapes against a darker sky. The city lights ran along the valley floor like a circuit board. I thought about 8 years of moving. Not cities. I'd always come back to Asheville, but within it. Job to job, project to project, apartment to apartment. Getting comfortable and then quietly making sure there was always a reason to leave before anything got too real. I'd told myself it was about the work, about keeping options open, about not being the kind of person who settled. But that night on the hood of the truck above the valley, I was honest with myself for the first time in a long time. It wasn't about the work. It was about the fact that temporary things couldn't disappoint you. Temporary things couldn't leave you. If you built your whole life out of temporary things, you never had to feel the weight of losing something permanent. I thought about Jess's apartment full of books, about the way she fixed her coffee and the particular way she asked questions that made you answer more truthfully than you'd planned. About do you have the courage to stay and the way she'd said it, not like a challenge, like she genuinely wanted to know, like the answer mattered. I thought about the desk, About how I'd known the leg was wobbling for 3 months and hadn't said anything. About how I'd fixed it in 20 minutes and hadn't wanted to leave. I thought about what she'd said on the step. Go back to where it was still right and rebuild from there. I sat there until the cold came up from the valley. Then I drove home, and I knew what I was going to say in the morning. What came after didn't happen fast. It grew the way good work grows, slowly, one careful layer at a time. She left a mug in my cabinet. I claimed the second shelf in her bookcase for the 3 books I owned that weren't about woodworking. Friday nights became the standing arrangement. She cooked, I cleaned up, we argued about what to listen to while the dishes dried. She started a running commentary on my tool organization that was equal parts accurate and relentless. I fixed the wobbly leg on her reading chair without saying anything about it. She noticed 3 days later and left a note on my workbench that said, "The chair says thank you, so do I." The truck became part of us the same way it had always been part of me. It carried us to the farmer's market on Sunday mornings, to the river on warm evenings, once all the way to her friend's wedding in Black Mountain, where she wore heels for exactly 90 minutes before trading them for the flats she'd packed in her bag. "I learned from the first time," she said, and dancing barefoot on the grass until the band stopped. One evening in late October, we drove out to a ridge road above the city and parked with the valley spread out below us, the lights of Asheville coming on one by one in the dusk. Jess sat on the tailgate beside me, shoulder against mine, bare feet swinging above the gravel. "I'm glad the cab canceled," she said. I looked at her. The last of the evening light caught the side of her face. "That's the best thing that ever happened to a broken app," I said. She laughed, then reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a key on a plain metal ring. She held it out. I looked at it. "That's my spare," I said. "I know," she said. "It was in the little box on your kitchen windowsill. Very secure, by the way." "You went through my kitchen windowsill." I was looking for a pen. She turned the key slowly in her fingers. "I don't want you to just be the person who drives me anymore," she said. "I want you to be the one I call when I want to come home, and the one I want to go with when I don't even know where we're going." I took the key from her, still warm from her pocket. I didn't make a speech. I didn't promise anything grand. I just looked at her sitting there on the tailgate in the mountain dark, the city below us, the whole valley lit up and waiting. "Next time," I said, "it's just us." She smiled, small, certain, the real one. "Next time," she said, and a lot of times after that. After I turned down Savannah, things shifted in the way good things shift. Not dramatically, just into a better arrangement. She started leaving her key on my counter when she went out of town for work, so I could water the plants. I started leaving the French press on her side of the kitchen counter when I made coffee early, so it was ready when she woke up. Nobody announced these things. They just happened, and then they kept happening, and after a while they were just true. One Saturday in November, we spent most of the day at the workshop space I rented downtown. She'd asked to come see a piece I was working on, a writing desk for a client. Solid walnut, hand-cut joinery, the kind of piece that would outlast both of us. She pulled up a stool and watched me work for 2 hours. She asked good questions. She didn't fill the silence unnecessarily. At some point, she picked up a scrap of walnut from the bench and held it up to the window light, turning it. "The grain goes all the way through," she said. "I know," I said. "That's what makes it worth using." She set it down carefully. "Is that a metaphor?" "It's an observation about wood." "Sure it is." She smiled and went back to her book, and I went back to the desk, and the afternoon light moved across the workshop floor, and outside the mountain air was doing what it did in November, and I thought about what it meant to build something that was meant to last. I thought about the desk. I thought about her. I thought about how the two things had started to feel like the same thought. Late afternoon, when the light had gone low and golden, she looked up from her book and said, "This is a really good place to read." I kept working. "You can come back," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I know." She said it simply, like it had already been decided, like it was already true. I kept working, but I was smiling. There was a Wednesday in November I won't forget. I was finishing the walnut desk, the last piece of joinery, the part that either holds or it doesn't, and my phone rang. It was Jess. She never called during work hours. "Hey," she said. Her voice was different, quieter. "Are you busy?" "I can stop," I said. "What happened?" She'd gotten a call that morning, the author she'd been working with for 2 years, the one who'd almost scrapped his novel and rebuilt it from the right place. His book had just been picked up by a major publisher, significant deal, the kind that changed careers. She'd found out during her lunch break, and had been sitting in her car outside the office for 40 minutes because she didn't know who else to call. "I don't know why I'm crying," she said. "It's not even my book. It's a little your book," I said. She laughed, a watery, real laugh. "It's a little my book." I set down the chisel. I drove to where she was parked. I didn't tell her I was coming, I just got in the truck and went. When I pulled up beside her car, she was still sitting in the driver's seat with her coffee going cold in the cup holder. She looked over and saw me and rolled her window down. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I know," I said. She looked at me for a moment. Her eyes were still a little red. Then she got out of her car and got into my truck. We sat there in the parking lot for a while, without going anywhere. I told her about the desk, about the last piece of joinery, about what it felt like when something you'd been working on finally came together. She told me more about the book, about the author's voice, about the thing the novel was trying to say, and how long it had taken to find the right way to say it. Neither of us mentioned that I'd driven across the city in the middle of a workday because she'd needed someone to sit with. Neither of us needed to. That was when I knew, with a certainty I hadn't had before, the kind that sits in your chest and stays, that whatever this was between us, it wasn't going anywhere. Not because of what we'd said on a bridge or in a parking lot. Because of this. The small, ordinary Wednesday afternoon of it. I drove her back to the office. She got out and paused at the door. "Thank you," she said, "for coming." "You'd have done the same," I said. She looked at me. "Yeah," she said quietly, "I would have." She went inside. I sat in the truck for a minute. Then I drove back to the workshop and finished the joinery. It held. I used to think the best work was the kind that took you somewhere new. Farther away meant better opportunity. Temporary meant free. I built that story carefully, the way I built everything. Measured it, framed it, made it hold. But here is what I know now. The best work I've ever done isn't in any house or kitchen or cabinet. It isn't the walnut desk or the built-in shelves or anything I could point to and say, "I made that." The best work I've ever done is showing up, staying, choosing the same thing every morning without making a production of it. Jess taught me that, not in a speech, not in a single moment, in 100 small ones. Soup left on a doorstep, a key on a counter, a question asked in the dark that deserved a real answer. In the way she sat on the step beside me without asking what was wrong, and said exactly the right thing without knowing she was saying it. In the way she held a scrap of walnut up to the light and turned it slowly and understood, without being told, what made it worth using. She asked me once if I had the courage to stay. I think about that question sometimes, not because I'm still deciding the answer, but because it took someone asking it for me to understand what the question even meant. Staying isn't the absence of leaving. It's a thing you choose actively, every day with both feet. I'd spent 8 years learning how to build things that lasted. Turns out I just needed to learn to build them for the right reasons. She was standing in the rain, the night everything started. She never had to stand in it alone again.